Blog Talk Radio.
Songs of Selah here on 17 Numa Radio. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm your host, Scott Thomas Outler. It is December the 3rd, 2018, and we'll be live here for the next hour and a half. Looking forward to tonight's episode. Coming up in the next segment, I'll be interviewing a poet here in the Atlanta area named Lane Young. We're going to be talking about her process when it comes to writing poetry, and she's going to read a few pieces from her latest chapbook titled Scattered Type, Old and New Poems. We'll also be talking about some of the events that she's read out here in Atlanta, including that at Callenwold Fine Arts Center, which she's also the host of and has been doing that for over 10 years at this point. So stick around for that. It's going to be a great interview, I'm sure. Speaking of guests, that song that we just heard in the intro was Summer's End by the band Spectralux, who is also another Atlanta connection that I have here, headed up by Peter Rowitz, and they were on an episode just a few weeks ago, so wanted to play another track off their upcoming album and mention that anyone that would be interested in hearing the archive of that show or any other past shows, including last week's with poet Don Villequez, can go to 17numa.com, and there's a Songs of Selah page there with links to all those past episodes. It's been a lot of fun here in the first couple of months with this show, still getting into a groove each week, learning as I go, and enjoying the process very much. So I hope everyone is having a happy holiday season so far. I believe this is the first show I've done since Thanksgiving, so I hope everyone is having a good time with family and friends during these days in between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then we have 2019 just around the bend. So lately, I've been doing a lot of writing. I'm working on my next book called Of Sand and Sugar, which is going to be released next year through Cyberwit Publications out of India. I'm really excited about this project. It's been coming together really nicely lately. I'm working with the great artist Misty Milwee, who agreed to do the cover, and I saw that recently, and I'm just even more inspired than ever to be working on the book now after the amazing piece of mixed media she put together for the cover. Looking forward to revealing that soon at my website, 17 Numa, and also across social media, where if anyone would like to connect, please do so on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all those good platforms. Let's see, what else is going on here lately? We've had the college football season championship games this past weekend, and I don't necessarily talk about sports that much in public. I'm usually focused more on my writing and the art, but college football, especially the University of Georgia, definitely plays a big impact in my life because of the connection with my grandfather. Grew up writing for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and writing about the Bulldogs every season for those 30 years that he was there. And then my father, who played at the university, and that connection I had growing up with him all my life. And so after they lost to Alabama this past Saturday, definitely another big blow to fans, I'm sure, all across Georgia. But you have to give Alabama their due, hearts of champions, and really put together a magnificent fourth quarter and knock Georgia's wheels off pretty much. But after that game was over, instead of sulking, I took a trip to the woods and was reminiscing about memories with my father and family. And I wrote this essay in my head to try and take my mind off of things or put things into a better context after that game. So I thought this would be a good opportunity here. Take a few minutes and read this. It's in honor of my father. Mist and fog in an evening of gray skies, reflections on almost and not quite, walking where trees provide a familiar echo, fresh air, and respite born calmly with each breath. The best test of character comes in moments of defeat, loss, heartache, and wounded pride. To be magnanimous and of goodwill during streaks of success or at the summit of great achievements should be expected. It is easy to rejoice when the fates sing glory, glory, hallelujah. But what reveals more about our true nature is how we respond when circumstances are difficult and dreams don't necessarily play out as we had planned. A patch of night becomes soft indigo velvet glowing through the branches of naked pines. Autumn will have its pound of flesh to serve as a harbinger of winter. I continue walking. Mist turns to rain. I think of my father often, but never more so than during UGA football games, especially those of the championship variety. Earlier tonight, during this holiday season, as the calendar flips to December, it would have created a feeling of high exultation to celebrate a victory with Dad's spirits singing along with us in happiness. Unfortunately, it was not to be for this year's team. For every champion crowned, there is also the other side that comes up just a bit short. That is the way of the world, not just when it comes to sports. So it can be fun to live vicariously through the drama played out on the television screen, each pinpoint pass caught in the corner of the end zone, or, alas, the chip-shot field goals gone astray to sail wide of the mark. But as the clock expires, it's important to keep in mind that there are events in life that transpire outside of our control. So the only effect that we actually do have is in choosing how to let their outcomes affect our consciousness. So instead of suffering in sadness over the completely uncool and unkind results of tonight's epic contest, as the final score flashes large on the board, I'd rather retreat to the woods for a stroll, reminiscing on happy memories that might arise, such as some of the great conversations Dad and I would have after watching similar results of games that went haywire in the past, about adversity and how it can be used to strengthen our resolve, how having our mettle tested can prove beneficial in the long run, about how to remain at peace during trying times. Welcome, my son. Welcome to the machine. The music plays in my headphones. The sky is a magnificent palette splashed with shades of purple. The air is wet and electric. Rhythm dances through the ether. I remember the first time I heard that Pink Floyd song while sitting in the passenger seat as an early teen, as my dad drove me to one of my baseball games. When the next track came on that day, he explained to me about the gravy train and how lyrics often have great depth of meaning. And then I think of the hundreds upon hundreds of times he took me to the field, sacrificing his time off from work to teach me how to play and develop skills for the game I loved so much as a child, instilling in me the concept that to succeed at any aspect of life takes dedication and a will to work behind the scenes when no one else can see the efforts. And so I would not moan too much after my favorite team squanders a double-digit lead in the second half and falls in agonizing defeat during the final minute of the game. Oh, what a shame. But remember instead my father's good name and try to carry it on the same. I'm thankful tonight for all the fond memories that have surfaced. I'm thankful for being blessed with a great family and friends. I'm thankful for my writing. I'm thankful for those thousands upon thousands of ground balls my dad hit to me at shortstop as we practiced alone on the field hour after hour through those early years. Every ground ball that he hit during that phase of my development turned into a poem written in this later stage of life. So those were my thoughts after the game, and just thought I would read them here tonight in honor of Barry Thomas Outler. God rest his soul. And so I hope everyone does enjoy this holiday season and be thankful for everything that you have and the moments that we share with those we love. So, looking forward to the next segment. We're going to be bringing Lane Young on to read some of her poem and talk about her work. Before going to that, I have a song here from another past guest that I would like to play. This was a piece of piano music written by Vlada Mars, who was on the show last month, and this is off of an album that she'll be releasing in the new year called Unfinished Dreams. Enjoy. right, my friends, welcome back to Songs of Selah. Once again, that was Unfinished Dreams by Vlada Mars. Hope you'll go and check out her music, always inspiring. So coming up next, I'd like to welcome a poet, Lane Young, to the show. Read an introduction here of her. Lane Young has lived in the Atlanta area all of her life, with the exception of 4 years at Grinnell College in Iowa. She has organized and hosted the monthly poetry readings at Callenwold Fine Arts Center in Atlanta for over a decade. She currently lives in Marietta, Georgia, and is married to the poet Stephen Windham. She has previously printed 4 poetry chapbooks, the most recent one being Scattered Type, Old and New Poems. Her poetry has appeared in the publications 360 Degrees, Potpourri, Lilliput Review, Mobius, the Sierra Nevada Review, The Shaky Table, Cover Magazine, the Journal of Poetry Therapy, Blue Milk, and others. She has been a featured poet at the Decatur Arts Festival, Java Monkey Speaks, Callenwold Fine Arts Center, and the Pine Lake Arts Festival. So I'd like to welcome Lane Young to the show.
Thank you,
Lane,
Scott. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. How are you this evening?
That's fine. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're coming through perfectly.
Great, great. Yeah, doing very well. Excited to be on the show.
Good deal. Yeah, it's once again cold here in Atlanta after a 75-degree day, I think, yesterday. So
yeah,
got a bit of everything here going on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I guess as we get going here, maybe we could talk a little bit about what initially attracted you to poetry and got that energy flowing in your life that you wanted to be a poet.
Okay.
Howard.
Yeah, I'll be more than happy to talk about it. One of my favorite subjects. So to talk about me and Ruth Long, later Ruth Windham, and her meandering poetry career. Well, I remember writing poems when I was about 7 years old, and I think I was influenced because my grandfather, on my mother's side, he was a writer, and he wrote historical fiction, but he also wrote his own version of the Billy Goat's Gruff tale and other things. And so I think I saw him write, and it made me want to write. And I think also just reading kids' books with a lot of rhyme, like the Dr. Seuss books, or, a lot of kids' books are actually written in poetry. And so I remember writing some poems then, and then I didn't really write much again until, I want to say, around 9 or 10 years old. I just wrote some rhyming poems, I remember, and kept them in a little notebook, which I brought to school. And one day, I don't know, it fell out of my books or something. I just lost it, and maybe I got discouraged by that and didn't really write too much for another good number of years. Wrote some poems in high school as assignments, and wrote some teenagery poems. And but then when I really got serious about writing poetry as a grown-up is I had a friend in college, actually a boyfriend, who gave me a copy of the book The Weight of Numbers by Judith Baumel, and it had won the Walt Whitman Award, which is for first books. And it just amazed me what poetry could do. It was very intelligent, had a lot of metaphysical elements to it. Judith Baumel went to a science high school. She had a lot of science background, and then she brought that into her poetry. But it also had a lot of craft to it, some formal poetry, some more free verse poetry. And if I could point to any one poet who's, influenced my own style and really got me, sort of inspired me in terms of the model of what I would like to do, that would be Judith Baumel. And, she has a few, I think she's probably, 4 books by now, and could certainly still find her work on the internet. And then just to say a little bit more about that, a friend of mine, Alicia Stallings, who goes by the name A.E. Stallings, publishes by that name, she and I went to Briarcliff High School together, and she wrote a lot of poetry then, and then she is one of the most driven, hardworking poets I know, and wrote a lot of poems and published a lot of poems in her 20s. She and I were living in Atlanta together, both living in Atlanta in our 20s, and she was very encouraging and got me out to read at Callenwold Fine Arts Center, got me to a lot of the open mics. She and I encouraged each other's work. Decades later, I've published a few self-published chapbooks, done a little bit She's published several books and gotten a MacArthur and a Guggenheim. So, if we can learn anything from this, hard work is an important factor as well as talent. So, but anyway, that all of those factors have been part of, me being excited about poetry and feeling encouraged to write poetry. And, I guess what keeps me going these days is every once in a while someone says they really like a poem, or they thought of a poem the other day when they were shopping for turtlenecks or whatever. That's
right.
the sort of thing that, makes me feel like it's still important to people. Yeah, later on I'll read my poem about turtlenecks. So, but yeah, that kind of sums up in a roundabout way my development into poetry.
So when you're speaking about your grandfather was a writer when you were growing up, so I know a lot of people maybe don't necessarily have family support or support at school.
Right.
They keep their poetry hidden. I have a lot
of friends
that's
true.
Sort of follow that. Were you supported in that way because you had those family members, or do you?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, my grandfather served as a role model, and I looked up to him. He lived in Texas. I only saw him every once in a while, but, I had a lot of affection for him, and to see him writing, and he would read my writing and encourage me to write. And in my immediate family, I was the only right-brained person. My sister is a doctor. My father is an economist. My mother is a math teacher, and my brother does computer programming and works for Oracle. So none of the other people in my family were writers of any kind, and I would be the one to help them with their homework. And but there's support, even if sometimes they'll like certain poems, but in generally they're not people who read poetry. But I have to give my mother a lot of credit for just being a fine mother in the sense of encouraging her kids, and she would ask me about it and share copies of my chapbooks with her friends, and ask me if I was writing. Often the answer was no. As I got to having stepchildren and working more, when she would ask me, have you been writing? Many months I would have to say, yeah, it's been a while. But the fact that she cared and supported me has meant a lot. And even though she died a few years ago, it still matters to me now.
Well, actually, you bring up that point of her passing away. I was reading back through some of your most recent chapbook, Scattered Type, Old and New Poems, and noticed that it was dedicated to both of your parents.
Yes.
And so...
Yeah, my father died a couple years after she did, and that was, I guess, I was trying to do the timeline recently. I think he died about 5 years ago, and she died about 7 years ago.
I'm sorry for your loss. I know that's always
well, thank you.
The worst thing that we can go through.
Oh, yeah.
My father a lot here during the holiday season.
Right. Yeah, you lost your grandmother not so long ago?
My grandmother, passed away
a
little less than a year ago, so definitely keeping all of them and fond memories during this time of the year.
Oh, yeah, and I find it, it's definitely changed the way I look at life and experience life. It's sort of before the death of the first, person who was, really almost felt literally a part of me, and then when they died, I felt like a part of me died, almost as if, part of my body had been just ripped out and it was never going to get replaced. And, life has, in my writing, my thinking, and outlook has never been the same since then, I think. So.
Oh, absolutely. I can understand that completely.
Yeah.
It's definitely a therapeutic outlet, the poetry.
Oh, absolutely,
So when you went to Grinnell College, what kind of, did you study poetry there or literature?
I did both. It was a 4-year liberal arts school. They didn't have an MFA program, and the English department actually had, I guess, entertained the idea of strictly poetry writing major and so forth. And I did take a poetry writing seminar. That's the most they offered. But the teacher, Mr. Kavanaugh, explained that they felt like an important part of a writer's education is to actually learn the English language, learn the history of the English language, know the literature, and that if someone were to major of course, in most MFA programs are postgraduate, but in general, they felt like the weight ought to be on reading poetry, studying, learning poetry, and learning about the language, disproportionate to having a class teaching you how to write poetry. But I did have a very excellent poetry writing seminar. The format was, we had, I think it was about 15 students. Every week before, I guess maybe a couple days before the class met, which was once a week, we had to write a poem, make 15 copies, don't put our name on it, and put it in a little box outside the teacher's door at his office. And then when class time came, we would read the poems and ostensibly not know who wrote them. After a while, we could guess who did because of their style. And then, people would just, it was kind of free form for people to get feedback. Sometimes it was kind of frank and harsh, and sometimes, you got criticism, you got compliments, and sometimes very technical suggestions. But I thought it was a wonderful format. I know a lot of MFA programs have something similar. But I think one of the values is to develop a thicker skin about getting feedback. It does help your poem, whether you're keeping the suggestions or defending to yourself what you did in the first place, sometimes changing things, finding out if there's something you intended in the poem that isn't being picked up on by the reader, or if there's something a little unclear. So that, and I got to know some other poets at the college, and the teacher had he had sort of a light, I like to say sort of a light touch in terms of teaching. Our textbook was the Norton Anthology of Modern Poetry, and he said just read it however you feel like it, flip around, look at the index of first lines, just read it however you like, just get yourself familiar with these poems, read out of this textbook. That was the textbook we had, just to use however we wanted. Occasionally there would be assignments, use as much musical elements as possible, do something ekphrastic, but that, I don't know, there was a just enough structure, but a lot of freedom in that course. And if I've ever taught at a workshop or something, I think that would be a strong model for what I would do. And it was for all sorts of styles of poetry, people who had come in at different levels of beginner versus intermediate, and but people who are ready to lay their poems out there and see what people had to say about them. So yeah, that was my experience from Grinnell College.
That sounds like definitely a good structure, because all these poets need to have their own individual ego as they go about their business. Yeah. So having the structure there, but then allowing it to freely flow in their own way and somewhat. It's like a good way to handle business for sure. Yeah. So you came back to Atlanta after that, and I'm interested in finding out what inspired you to get into hosting the Callenwold. You mentioned that you had gone there when you were in your 20s with your friend.
Right. Yeah, Alicia Stallings had been going. Yeah. Right. Alicia Stallings had been going to it before I had, and she also was sort of, I don't want to say drag me along, encouraged me, and we would go together to Emory University, had a lot of free readings, which they still do, Georgia State, Agnes Scott. She just sought out readings that we could go to, and one of them was Callenwold, which is close to where we both lived. So that in fact how I got to be a regular attendee, and she was for, I don't know, maybe a decade, she was the head of the Callenwold Poetry Committee. And then when she married John Saropoulos and moved to Greece, where she's been ever since, she needed a replacement. So the other folks on the committee who are a bit older, they decided, let's find a young person with energy and time to spare. And that was me at the time. And I'm still doing that today. I guess about 20 years later, I don't have as much energy, and I may be showing some signs of burnout. I don't want to get too specific about it, but we're also getting some new folks to help us. But it's a lot of work, but I'm gratified to do it, and it's always nice to hear people who say they really enjoy this space at the Arts Center, the beautiful mansion, and we often have open readings, which I think is valuable to the community. But that's the story of how I got involved. And side note, that's the first time I met my husband was at Callenwald. So there's that.
Oh, very cool.
and now he serves as roadie and audiovisual guy at the reading. So that's something we do together. Come rain, come shine, or regardless of what mood we're in, that second Wednesday of the month, there we are. But I'm glad to make sure it keeps going on. It started, I think, sometime in the 70s, so it's
Wow.
one of the longest running poetry series in Atlanta. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful venue, that old Coca-Cola building.
Yeah.
Mansion.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah,
what
basically,
are
Go ahead.
What are some of the events that you've held there recently? Some of the readings or poets who have been reading there this year?
Let's see. 2 months ago, we had a very popular, well-attended event. It was a memorial celebration of Anya Kruger-Silver. She had passed away, I guess it had been a couple of months before, after just very long struggle with breast cancer and recurrence. And we had a number of poets who lived in Georgia were invited to come and read particular poems, often favorite poems of theirs that Anya had written. And so that is something we did then. And we have done other memorial poetry readings, such as for Eugene Ellis and Turner Cassidy, John Stone, and all of those people had been involved in the Callenwald Poetry Committee in the past. Anya Silver was just very important to a lot of people in Georgia. I think particularly, cancer survivors and women particularly found a lot of meaning in her work. And she also wrote quite a bit about her family and her experience as a woman. And there was just really a wide appeal, and as some indication of the esteem and popularity of her work. Her obituary, there was an obituary that appeared in the New York Times, and that's something listeners can refer to find out a bit more about her. But yeah, that is something we did recently. I'm particularly proud of. But we have generally, September, October, November. We have featured poets or programs. January open reading. It's hard to get people out in January, so we do the open reading then. February, March, April, May. We have featured poets or special programs. And then again in the summer, June, July, and August, we have open readings. And listeners out there who live in the Atlanta area, just go to the website, and we ask that folks sign up ahead of time, but the first 10 people to sign up can read for 5 minutes, and it's free and open to the public. It's a nice space. I like to say we have higher than average quality of poets come. A lot of folks of a variety of ranges of ability and practice in poetry. Some folks who've been featured readers there many times are there. A lot of students of Mimi Curtis Tucker, who's taught poetry at Callenwald for a long time. They are often there, especially in the summer. So I encourage people to check that out. We don't have our calendar for 2019 on the website yet. That's the sort of thing that tends to get done about the end of the year. But if you'll check callenwald.org or Google, of course, Callenwald Fine Arts Center, you can find that information. I think you should probably have it up. Callenwald takes time off fairly. They take a vacation fairly early in December, but once again, January is going to be an open reading. So I would say just check back at the beginning of the year and see what our spring schedule is going to be. So, Scott, that's about what I have to say about Callenwald.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, and I just second everything you said. It's a great venue, and there's always the few times that I've been able to make it, met a lot of really interesting poets there, and it's just fun to get out in the Atlanta area and network and meet other people who
of course
love the
and
word.
For those who don't know, we did have Scott as a featured poet at Callenwald. So.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Wonderful venue. So let's skip or shift our focus a little bit here from some of your hosting duties to some of your writing in particular. Maybe talk a little bit about this most recent chapbook that you put out, Scattered Type, Old and New Poems. what inspired you to sort of merge the two eras together and inspire the project?
Well, let's see, when you say eras, it's funny you should say that. I wrote lots of poems in my 20s, a few poems in my 30s, even fewer in my 40s. I'm now 51. So it's, if you wanted to draw a graph of frequent number of poems per year, it would be descending. So in fact, by the time the scattered type, the fourth chapbook is old poems from previous chapbooks as well as 3 new poems. And so it had been about 10 years since my previous chapbook called The Failed Cynic. So I hope they're pretty good poems, but the new poems are exactly 3, and they're right at the front, and the rest is what I kind of consider the best of my older poems. And the occasion for doing it, or sort of immediate impetus, was a couple of years ago I registered for 2 poetry conferences. One is Poetry by the Sea, which is in Connecticut, and if we have time we can talk about that later. Another is the Westchester Poetry Conference in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is focuses on narrative and form, formal poems, and longer narrative poems, of course. So before I showed up, for the folks who didn't know me, which is almost everyone at this conference is, I thought this would be a nice thing to have to sell, but more often just give away to poets that I met and admired. But I'll say that's the thing I like about chapbooks is they're not expensive to produce, especially if, like me, you don't have any fancy graphics. I just have the title and bio on the back, and it costs maybe $1 to print each one. And then if I'm at an open reading, I can sell them for maybe $5. And if I meet some poets who also have a chapbook, sometimes we just trade. So it's a nice way to get printed copies of your work to people well before you have a book. Getting a full book published is often, a sort of long sought after goal that may or may not happen. And it was even more valuable, I think, back before the internet. I couldn't. There wasn't a time, before. I guess let's think 1990 when I got out of college. I couldn't say, I've got a few poems on the internet. Just look them up there. This was something. Again, just hand to each other. They sort of look like zines the way I do them. I even used to photocopy them instead of printing them out. And I'll give Alicia Spelling's credit for that too. That's something that she did. She would put out a chapbook about every other year and draw her own illustration on the front. And so I have some of those, hopefully collector's items there. But I certainly encourage any poets who they're not not exactly close to having a book. Maybe they don't have enough poems for a book yet. You can put together a poetry book chapbook. I know they have contests, and that's something new to me. Is sort of the chapbook that gets published these days. That's perfect bound. To me, it's sort of things between the old-fashioned staple-bound chapbook. Which actually, has a long history back to the Romantic poets, where they would just hand sew them and give them to other poets, and then, sort of continued until the era of cheap, printing and printing on demand. So of course, there are chapbook poetry contests to enter, and there's that sort of perfect bound chapbook, which looks almost like a book, and there's a lot of value in that. But I think basically what I do, they're not even books in the sense of they don't have ISBN numbers. They say privately printed by the author, and something I just sell and hand out, and don't worry. To me, I don't look to make a living being a poet. I'd love to make a little money here and there, but the more important source of satisfaction for me is getting poems out there, getting people to read the poems, being able to share them quickly, and easily with people who liked a particular poem. They'd like to take a copy of it away from the reading with them. So there you are. There's my reason for doing scattered type and my plug for chapbooks. Do your own or enter your contests. I'm all for chapbooks.
Chapbooks are wonderful. I love the energy of them, the thematic style that can go into them, and as you were talking about the internet, is there all these burgeoning indie presses and small market
right.
presses that are opening up. A lot of them do use the print on demand that you were talking about, and then there are still those out there that put in their own little touch on them and put out interesting packages. And there's so many out there, and it's a great way, as you were saying, to get your energy out there, because I mean, as poets, we want people to be reading our words. So however we can do it, out there and let the message spread. And I've read through Scattered Type a couple of times. Really have enjoyed it both times.
Oh, thank you.
A lot of good poems in here, and I was hoping that maybe you could read a couple of those for us this evening.
Yes, I absolutely can. Let's see, and I did, Scott, send you a list, and I think I'll just, we can read them in order and maybe talk about, I can introduce them a little bit, and there might be some conversation that comes out of the poems. So maybe we could do that. Well, I'll tell you what, before we get into that, if you don't mind, if I could just say a little bit about Cudsley Press, because I told one of the authors I would be sure to mention it. So would it be all right to talk about that at this juncture? Okay. And then we'll get into poems and discussing. Okay. All right. So if we haven't said so already, Lane Young is my pen name, and it's the name I'm under, but the name, my legal name that I operate within the world is Ruth Windham. And if you go to Callenwald, that's me, that's Ruth Windham behind the microphone and whatnot. Email address that you'll see to sign up for open mics, Ruth Windham. And if you go to the website, cudsleypress.com, Ruth Windham is the editor-in-chief. My husband, Stephen Windham, is the production manager, and it's a two-person operation at the moment, but we've done a fair number of books so far. We've got Anthony Harrington, longtime poet and also Callenwald member since the 70s. His poem book is From the Attic, selected verse. And then after that, we've published one new book by Clifford Brooks, Athena Departs. We reissued his first book, which is The Draw of Broken Eyes in Whirling Metaphysics. Also a chat book called Exiles of Eden, which is a selection from Athena Departs, plus a couple of poems that don't appear elsewhere. We did a chat book by Peter Junker called Lunacy, it's called. That was a limited edition 100-copy chat book. And then our latest venture is going to be a full-length book by Peter Junker, and that's called Safer Ground. And just a little something special about his poems is he invented his own form, which is called the Junker Sonnet. It's 100 syllables, 10 lines of 10 syllables each. And he writes with sort of a wry sense of humor, I think Billy Collins, but a bit darker, and maybe having lived, through a little, some ups and downs, very intelligent poetry. There are some examples of it you can find if you Google Peter Junker. Some of his poetry is available on the internet. But if you'll check our website, cudsleypress.com, you can purchase books with free shipping if you order through the website, and news about upcoming books. So I'll tell you, it is nice to have that, writing poetry, submitting poetry, that can be very discouraging. There's something I like about also in my life, also working as an editor, encouraging other poets, seeing that books by poets I admire are actually getting their work done and, getting covers and getting the books designed in ways that they have input on. So, in fact, there are days when I think that's more. There's a certain gratification to that's harder to find in being a poet, in trying to publish one's own poems. So having that kind of balance has been good. I'm glad to. Oh, go ahead. Yes, exactly. Collaborative effort. And go ahead.
Well, I was also going to mention real quick, I'm looking forward to that Peter Junker book. I remember hearing some of the stylings of that form you talked about at an event at UUCA, I think, when you released it.
That's right, yeah. It's called, I believe the official name is Wine, Cheese, and the Spoken Word. And, then, Scott and I and Peter have read at that program, which was once a month. And the church is actually, they've left their building of many years, and they're in sort of interim space right now. But yeah, Peter did. In fact, he was a featured poet at that event once, and yeah. So yeah, you're a little familiar with Peter's poetry.
Yeah, it just rang a bell. I had forgotten about that until you mentioned that forum, because I remember him speaking about that, reading a few poems of that style that evening. But yeah, that event hosted by Carol Welter. Give her a shout out. She's a great advocate of the arts here
I think
as well in Atlanta.
Yeah, they still have those events, and you might. I try to keep them posted on the Poetry Atlanta Facebook page. But I would just advise listeners just to check that every once in a while, check the calendar there, and see when the next one's going to be, and that'll also give the address of where they're holding it these days. So.
Well, speaking about Kudzu Leaf Press a little bit more, because you talk about the different type of enjoyment that you can get out of the editing or out of the designing process, and that, what was it that initially gave you the idea that you wanted to start this?
Well, it's actually a continuation of something that Anthony Harrington had done for many years. He published what he called kudzu pamphlets, which are basically chapbooks that he would print for himself or others. And I think, in fact, there were other people involved decades ago who also, I think books were sometimes called kudzu editions. And so I did just trying to continue in that tradition, but I wanted to distinguish it as sort of a new entity, being called Kudzu Leaf Press. Well, and in fact, let's see, we did, Tony and I worked on a book of Jean Ellis's poetry back when we really did not know what we were doing, I think, and I would really love to reissue that book sometime soon. It was by Eugene Ellis, and it was called Alewives, and that's, excuse me, having to try to remember all of this. It was a good while ago. At that point, we collected what we felt were Jean's best poems, and Jean Ellis was still alive at the time and worked on that selection. And I was rather busy with some things at the time, and Tony did most of the work, but he presented a manuscript is on paper and gave it to the people we still work with, BookLogix, who does the printing of the books. And so I guess they typed it or scanned it or something, but that was before, I mean, the technology was there, but these days we just submit electronic files and go from there. But at that time we hadn't developed our sense of aesthetic or, what we wanted the poems to look like on the page, what fonts, which makes a lot of difference in the look of the book, what sort of paper to put it on, trying to come up with a very professional-looking cover. So, yeah, that explains the beginnings of Kudzu Leaf Press, but I feel like I learned something with each book, and we try to do a little better each time and get better about promoting and using social media, trying to promote another way. It seems like there are infinite possibilities out there for marketing and promotion, but also a seemingly infinite number of books to compete with. So
Exactly.
you do your best. So
yeah, you do have a Facebook page, I think, for Kudzu Leaf Press as well, don't you?
Yes, we do.
People can check out that and go to the website.
Yeah, both that and the website. Yes, both of those.
Okay, good deal. So, any other projects besides the one with Peter coming up in the future, or keeping
Not immediately. I do want to reissue Tony's book with a new introduction by A.E. Stallings, which, and also, well, one thing that's changed since we put out Tony's book in 2015 is that BookLogix has coordinated with some of the newer developments in publishing. There's Ingram, excuse me, if I can, let me get a drink of tea real quick here.
Certainly.
Okay. Ingram is a longtime distributor of books, and they have something now called Ingram Spark, which is basically printing on demand, or you could call it really printing at the point of sale. So if someone buys a book on Amazon and Amazon doesn't stock it, then the order goes to Ingram Spark, and they print one copy of the book and send it out to the customer, which seems in some ways inefficient, but that means your book doesn't have to be warehoused anywhere in order to get it to sell. And they print out batches of books that are the same size, and but that's the technology these days. They just connect it with the file that tells them what the cover is going to look like, what all the pages on the inside are, print the book, bind it, send it out. So that's something that we didn't get set up with Tony's book. We didn't get an electronic book set up, and so those are some things we kind of want to bring that book into the contemporary platforms, which that doesn't seem like that long ago, 2015, and those things were there, but they just weren't as immediately available to do as sort of a package deal with the printer and the facilitator of the publishing. Taking the things I've learned since then, as well as the new opportunities. I think Ingram Spark hasn't been around too long, but that that's a wonderful thing for authors, because your book is never out of print as long as it can be ordered and printed on demand. I guess indefinitely. So, and then in terms of other future projects, we just kind of have to take it a little at a time, because we front it. My husband and I front it with our own money. So, and then from book sales. And that could take a while to recoup. But we'd like to continue to do chat books. Chat books are easier and less of a monetary investment there. But, we're just basically, looking ahead just a little at a time. We're at a point where, just practically speaking, we cannot accept unsolicited manuscripts. We don't have contests. It's really sort of curated, you might say, or just books that, it's people we know, people whose work we admire, and publish their work. So that's sort of, it's, you might call it, it's more than a hobby, but less than a business, if I could put it that way. We're looking ahead just a little at a time, I guess I can put it that way.
And I would just encourage listeners to definitely go check out your website and purchase some of those books, because anybody that's putting in the energy and the time with a small press or an indie press is really doing a labor of love at this point in the world. And like you said, it is a oversaturation in the market, competing, as you had said, with so many titles out there. And so when people put their heart and their souls into these types of projects, you want to support them out there. You don't have to buy a cup of Starbucks every day. You can support your local indie authors and publishers, and we all greatly appreciate that. To say the least.
Thanks for that. Yeah, sometimes chat book, maybe $10 or something. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, so now maybe we could dive back into your chat book and talk about some of these pieces that you'd like to read.
Okay. Well, it might be easiest for me if we can. Looks like we're getting. It's going to be 5 minutes till 10. If I could just select a few of the poems we talked about. Let's see. I know you had mentioned one of them. I'm going to start with the poem Repairs, which is the opening poem in the collection. And it's a poem that came out of just a thought I had, just occurred to me sort of out of the blue one day. Maybe, I guess I had cut myself on something on my arm, and then just observe it. Just keeps getting better till I almost see it gone. And then I think, well, isn't that a remarkable thing that our bodies do? We have scars, but that almost always the scars heal if we, get a cold. Eventually, the cold goes away. Our body is amazingly resilient. We don't heal from everything or heal completely from everything frequently, but just that that phenomenon was something I was grateful for. So I wrote this poem called Repairs, and it is in meter and rhyme except for one comma after the word repairs, which I consider it a rest, kind of like in music. So I'm going to say that counts as a syllable. The rest equals a syllable, so I'm going to defend that. Okay, well, let me read the poem. It's called Repairs. I often wonder, what if we didn't heal? Every break of bone would stay apart. Every cut would bleed and never seal. along with every fracture of the heart. Poison ivy rashes, tendon tears, ego bruises, tempests of the brain, wells of grief and general despairs, and colonies of microbes would remain. For all the woven tales a body tells, for all of these repairs, let me say, thank you, blood and bones, thank you, cells, thank you, soul, thank you, DNA.
Lovely. The body is an amazing healing machine.
Yeah. Well, if you like, I'll just go ahead. Well,
I was going to say, you're talking about the form that you used in that, which was the end rhymes mostly, and I thought maybe you could jump into another poem, or maybe we could talk about, because you had mentioned one of these conferences, or a couple of the conferences you had gone to, where you had a chance to talk about formal versus free verse poetry.
Yeah, free verse.
Share some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, this is a perfect poem to talk about that with, because I had, at Poetry by the Sea, I had signed up for a class on rhyme with Dick Davis, who's a well-known formal poet, and he's done a lot of translations from Persian. He's from England, but he spent most of his teaching career in the United States. I think it was in Ohio before he retired. But I learned a lot from that rhyme seminar, including about internal rhyme and the various, feminine rhyme and near rhyme and so forth. And I realized how I had done a lot of that in my poetry, particularly internal rhyme and irregular rhymes. And when I went back and looked at it, I thought, well, that's not bad. I should do more of that. And it does, create the music. Part of the enjoyment of poems is not just the meaning, but the sounds and the music of it. So it gave me a new appreciation of that, and I try to be conscious of it and not just do it out of imitation or unconsciously. And I had him look at some of my poems, and this is one of them, and he did point out that in this third to last line, it's, for all of these repairs, let me say. He said to make it metrical, I could write, for all of these repairs, just let me say. To me, I think it may make it strictly metrical, but it doesn't improve it, and that's kind of an awkward. That's not the sort of thing I would say. Just let me say. So maybe in some dialects. So to me, it kind of reinforced my sense of do what you feel is right for the poem, and there are occasions, particularly with humorous poems, where I'll stick to the strict meter and rhyme. But for the most part, I tend to feel free to, tend toward formal poetry and use some of the conventions, sometimes regular in terms of the lines and stanzas, but try to do what's best for servicing the vision of the poem. And often that means, getting outside of the strictures of form. But yeah, there's I think since going to that conference and then going to the Westchester Poetry Conference, which I'll let folks look that up. I know we have a limited time left, but even though I haven't been to an MFA program and I don't know that I'll have the money or time to do it, even just going to these conferences and meeting some excellent teachers and other poets, I've found that really worthwhile. There was a particular poem that Scott said he liked. So I would like to read that one, if I may.
Okay, great, yeah.
I'll go ahead and read that one next. So I have my pages here, loose. Here we go. This poem the title is sort of it's not a parody. It sort of borrows from Marianne Moore's poem, I Too Dislike It, in which she sort of tongue-in-cheek talks about how she dislikes poetry. So you may know that from your English classes, but my poem is called I Too Dislike Writers. And I'm going to get a sip of tea before I launch into this one. Okay.
I think I remember hearing you read this one at the UUCA as well.
Yeah.
It might have been
that
Peter Junker event, probably.
Yeah, it may well have been, yeah. All right, here we are. I Too Dislike Writers. They come up with odd monikers for themselves. They call their work their stuff. Like actors, they alternate between knee-knocking shyness and braying. When reading their work, they're so swollen with pride, so craving an audience, they lose all sense of when to cut it off. They forget responsibilities in pursuit of inspiration. They grab up secrets and events they come upon as material, molding it enough to get it wrong, yet keeping it recognizable. They drop the names of writers they have read and of writers they have met but haven't read. They sit in cafes writing in their notebooks, shamelessly absorbed in their pure endeavor. It's too bad their products can't be synthesized. It's the same way as with oysters and silkworms. We have no choice but to put up with their processes.
Yeah, I love that poem. So many writers flash through my head at each line, myself sometimes.
Yeah, well, I imagine we're all guilty of pretentiousness or, taking ourselves too seriously. But that should not do that. If we didn't take ourselves at least a little bit seriously, we wouldn't do something that's so discouraging and often lacking in immediate gratification, in terms of recognition. So
good point.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, I'll tell you what. Maybe I'll go ahead and read the turtleneck poem, and then if it's all right, I'll finish with found objects, and I think that might be about all of our time. Is that right?
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left here. So.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that with minimal introduction. All right, so my poem called What I've Got Against the Turtleneck, I wrote while I was going to school at Grinnell College in Iowa, which is very different weather-wise from Atlanta, Georgia. Lots of snow. There's snow on the ground from about late October till spring. So it's a good place to go if you want to stay indoors and make yourself study a lot. You don't get too distracted going outside during those months. But I saw a lot more turtlenecks than I'd ever seen in my life. Turtlenecks as in turtleneck sweaters and shirts and so forth, which I thought looked, I don't know, not the best fashion choice, I think. So let's see. I tore that one out. So let me get that. This was supposed to make it easier. I was going to tear out the pages I needed. Here we are. What I've got against the turtleneck. Shirt or sweater, I don't care. It's not a flattering thing to wear. A neck is to be borne with pride, and not a part sin bids you hide. What better than a neck to wed the mortal body to the head, charm that turtlenecks can only harm? A thinner neck is less disguised, a wider neck more realized. The warmth the turtle's neck affords, a scarf that and good style awards. So all the people west to east, all those who read these lines at least, who think the turtleneck is fun, who think the turtle look is fun, should heed some sound advice from one whose fashion sense is most adept. Forsake the turtleneck, except for some who wear well any clothes, and oh yes, you are one of those. And then I will finish with a poem that sort of sums up my aesthetic more than other poems. And I will mention that my poem, What I've Got Against the Turtleneck, is on my website, laneyoungpoet.com, as well as Found Objects, and actually several of the poems I'm reading during the program are there. I've put up previously published poems so that there isn't an issue with submitting them to magazines. Anything I would still consider submitting to magazines I want to hold on to, but all of those have been published before.
Okay, great. And
all right,
is there a place at your website where they can order the chapbook?
No, I'll tell you, I really don't have very many copies left of any of the chapbooks. If someone would like, to contact me through the website and write a few sentences of flattery, then I will very likely send you one. But at the moment, I don't have them for sale. If the demand is raised, but it is a limited edition, so I honestly, I don't have very many left.
Okay.
I guess I do that to make them sound like collectibles. I guess I don't know why I limit. Well, I'll tell you the truth. Also, contests. They say it's okay if you've published something in a chapbook of a printing of 200 or less. So that is the main reason I limit the number that I print. Okay, just a minute. So the last poem I'm going to read, Found Objects, is inspired by something I think a lot of Atlanta folks are familiar with. It's Paradise Gardens, which is a folk art environment created by Howard Fenster. It's in Summerville, Georgia. He passed away, I think, maybe a decade ago, but the art environment is still being kept up by a foundation, and actually a lot of among the best pieces were brought to the High Museum of Art so they could be in a protected environment, not out in the elements. So there's actually a very good collection of some of his pieces there. But he worked with, classic of a folk artist. He worked with some found materials. He used to repair bikes, so there's actually a lot of bike parts that are there. And actually the poem describes a lot of what the artwork is like. So the epigraph to the poem is actually a poem that he painted on a sign. It's a 4-line poem that Howard Finster painted on a sign that's somewhere in the garden. So that's going to be the epigraph. Let me get a drink of tea, and this is not a very long poem, Scott, so I'll read right through it in just a minute.
Okay.
All right. Okay, the title of the poem is Found Objects, and I'll read the epigraph before I get into the poem. Poem for the garden, pieces you threw away and put them together night and day, washed by rain, dried by sun, a million pieces all in one. And that's by Howard Finster on a painted sign in Paradise Gardens. In Howard Finster's gardens grow the things we leave to waste unmeasured, broken parts, outmoded and outworn, reconceived as unearthed treasure, lawn statues, bottle glass, ceramic tiles, mailboxes, buttons, clocks, plastic flowers, body parts of mannequins and bicycles, mosaically arranged in walls and sidewalks, lined in buildings, cultivated into towers. Tactile artists know the unexhausted charms of scattered shape and hue and light. We love the purely physical, form lost from its function, fallen, ripe for reconnection. Emerson of his shells was only partly right. While nothing is fair or good alone, still each and all may gain new ground. The odd and long forgotten may yet find some other elevation where they shine.
Wonderful.
And that's all the poetry, Scott.
That is. So, what would you say? I mean, you said that this probably best sums up your aesthetic, and what is it that you overall are trying to do when you write a poem, or are there? And I also wanted to know here at the end, we do still have a few minutes left, so maybe talk a little bit about your process in writing. Is it a snapshot in time that you're capturing, or do you have a poem that builds with you for a while and then sort of add on to it as it goes in your editing process?
Yeah, to answer that last question, it's generally an accumulation of material, of lines, of thoughts, and goals of what I'd like to write. And this is a perfect example in terms of accumulation and somewhat, I guess, in parallel to the subject of it. I had been to Paradise Gardens. I also had a book of photographs from the garden. And I looked at them, and I'd made notes, just little fragments of poetry as I looked at them over and over again, and did a lot of rewrites of this poem until I was happy with it. And in terms of it reflecting my aesthetic and also to some extent my worldview, there's another poem I realize is a lot like it called Art Museums and Lovers, which is also in my chapbook scatter type. But it has to do with people in that one people are going to the art museum and they see things that they like. They're inspired by certain paintings or artworks, and it's they feel like that's the sort of thing we want our love relationship to be about. We want to, find things that are going to strengthen us in a life that's often difficult and violent and troubling, but it's also beautiful, and so it just kind of helps feed them. Something, I think part of the poems is something to build a nest of, just, take a little bit of the inspiration from art. And then with found objects, it's similarly, accumulating these things that we sort of make our own gardens out of, figuratively speaking, and something we do with poetry often is try to bring and evoke and remember beautiful things and things that happen to us. And then the phrase, I use the word odd a lot, the odd and long forgotten. That shows up a lot. I'm kind of an oddball person myself and often feel like I'm on the margins, and I find a lot of inspiration and fellowship with other artists, and reading poetry makes me feel a part of the community of poets today and in the contemporary and as well as in the past when I read books of poems by people who died a long time ago. The odd and long forgotten or not forgotten can kind of come together and having that similar worldview and love of poetry and art. So that's what that poem means to me.
Okay, thank you for that. Something to build a nest of. I love that line that you used there.
Oh, thank you.
It rings true. So we're coming just to the end of the show here, but I know that you had sent me a poem that's not in your chat book called The Warm South. I wondered if we still have enough time, if you'd like to read one more poem maybe to send us out tonight.
Okay, well, I'll try to dash through it. Actually, The Warm South is also the title of a manuscript that I sent out to a contest, and fingers crossed will become a book someday. But, yeah, that's also the title of the manuscript, The Warm South. All right, well, I'm just going to go right through it. The Warm South. There's an epigram from John Keats, Ode to a Nightingale. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm South, full of the true, the blushful hippocrene. February 15th, 1820. Dear Mr. Keats, I just heard from your brother George that you're not well, that your consumption has the upper hand. I pray that you, and perhaps accompanied by Miss Braun, rather than journey for your health to Rome, might yet heed my advice to sail the Atlantic. Imagine, if you will, an uneventful passage to an even warmer south, a pastoral setting for your elegy, among a verdant overgrowth of vines. And in the spring, forests full of singing cardinals, chipping sparrows, purple finches, Carolina wrens, and in the city, mourning doves and mockingbirds. And in the meadows where butterflies and bees find nectar in the blooms are blackberries and thickets, honeysuckle vines, variegated clover, dandelions, violet clematis, climbing fences, and juicy muscadine. For consumption there's as yet no cure, yet I would have you here to end your days, where on a summer afternoon the songs of birds might easily inspire your lungs and ears, a steady beam of sun might warm your chest. At twilight, after thunder clouds and rain, you might see from your bedroom's open window twinkling fireflies in the darkening glade, might breathe the earth's evaporating mist, and in the moment when your breath subsides, feel the pulse of your beloved's wrist. Well, thank you, Scott, for having me on your program.
Well, thank you, Ruth, so much for coming on. Thank you for everything you do with Callan-Wold and
Appreciate it.
Press. And I just always want to have people on this show and support artists here in the Atlanta area. And it's a wonderful place, and I hope that people will go and check out the Kudzu Leaf Press site, look you up on social media, and support what you're doing. And good luck with your manuscript, The Warm South, as well.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you again for having me. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it as well, and have a good evening, Ruth.
All right, thank you. You too.
Thanks. All right, so that was Ruth Windham joining us here this evening. Goes by the name Lane Young in her writing, and as I just mentioned, please do go and support her work. Anyone that's putting their time and energy into the arts deserves to be supported. So I want to thank her for being on the show today. And I'd like to now play another track by Vladimir's, and then I'll be back with a few more words before we close up shop and talk about next week's show. So this one is Silver Threads. Enjoy. back to the final segment of Songs of Selah this evening. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening here on 17 Numa Radio through Blog Talk Radio. If you are on the live stream or perhaps listening to this at a later time on the archive and want to get in the loop for future shows, it's really easy to subscribe. Just look up above the slideshow where all those photographs are and see the purple subscribe button. Click on that and you'll be good to go to check out all the past episodes with guests like Vladimir's, who we just heard from with Silver Threads, and Spectralux, another Atlanta band. Also have had Don Biaquez on the program recently, my friend Heath Brocker, a good episode with him, and Donna Snyder was the first episode I did here on 17 Numa, so I encourage everyone to please go and check out those past episodes. So here, with a few minutes left in the show, I just wanted to mention that you can also find more of my work at 17numa.com or connect with me on social media. Facebook is where I'm most active these days. And I wanted to mention that my most recent book, Abstract Visions of Light, is available through Alien Buddha Press. I have copies that can be ordered directly through me if you want to send me an email or message me on one of those social media platforms. I also have copies of Songs of a Dissident, which was my first chapbook from Transcendent Zero Press, Chaos Songs from Weasel Press, and Happy Hour Hallelujah from Creative Talents Unleashed on hand at the moment. So if there's anyone who might like to order a bundle package deal here as Christmas and the holidays are upon us, please do get in contact with me. And on that note, I wanted to read a piece from Abstract Visions of Light to close out the show this evening. It was also recently published at a site called Word Dish. This is Natural Reflection of Your Palms. This is my breath, the same as yours, the same as dust, the same as ash when it all comes to an end, but held deeply within steady lungs that long for truth while we're still here. This is my flesh, the same as yours, the same as tissue, the same as sinew, but without fiber optic connections as of now, and never will be, so don't dare try me with temptations towards such so-called system upgrades. This is my blood, the same as yours, the same as a river, the same as the ocean where we all swam before the expansion of our evolution was set into forward motion. These are my hands, the same as yours, the same as caring, the same as giving, the same as taking, the same as wanting, the same as needing to hold everything that is loved firmly within their grasp. That's Natural Reflection of Your Palms from Abstract Visions of Light. So once again, thank you everyone for tuning in this evening. Thank you to my guest Lane Young for coming on and reading poems from her chapbook, Scattered Type, Old and New Poems, and talking to us about her process and the events that she's been to here recently. Wishing everyone a happy holiday season this month of December. Please tune in next week when my guest will be Dustin Pickering and Z.M. Wise, the editors-in-chief for Transcendent Zero Press down out of Houston, Texas. Looking forward to hearing some poems from them and talking about their journey with TZP and the journal they put out on a quarterly basis, Harbinger Asylum. So, cheers and Selah, my friends. Until next time, be well.